Okay, welcome everybody to our editing panel. I'm Katherine D. Graham, a USA Today bestselling author, editor, and book reviewer. And joining me on this panel are Belle Manuel and Morgan from Glasswing Editing. And we are going to answer your questions about editing options you have as indie authors, because I think this is one of the most vital pieces to making your book sell more copies, besides maybe a professional cover, and get good reviews. But the options can be so overwhelming. I know, Belle, you've been writing longer than me, and Morgan, you've been editing quite a while. And when I first came on as an indie author a couple of years ago to try to write my own stuff and not just be an editor anymore, Google was overwhelming. It was like, oh, use this software, do this thing, pay these people thousands of
Yeah,
dollars. So before we get started, though, why don't you guys introduce yourselves, tell them a little bit about your experience as far as editing goes. Belle, you want to start us off, and then Morgan?
sure. I'm Belle Manuel. I'm an editor. I've been editing for 2, 3 years now. I went to school for creative writing. I have a degree in English and modern languages. And as you said, I've been writing for several years now. And so I've also been editing for several years. So being able to see both sides of the creative coin has really helped me gear my freelance business towards helping indies specifically, because we have a very different marketing timetable than trad authors do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Morgan, I'm so excited to have you here too from an editing company standpoint. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Glasswing Editing?
So my name is Morgan Macedo. Glasswing Editing is my own company. Um, and I've been editing for a few years now as well. I specialize in fantasy and romance and sci-fi, which are all the things that I love to read, which means that I absolutely love doing what I do. It does not feel like work. But I love the taking the journey with the authors and helping them produce a final product that that's what they were trying to get all along. And when they say like, oh my gosh, this is perfect, I love it, I'm so happy, that makes me happy. And that's why
Mhm.
what I do.
We're so glad to have you. Morgan has been one of the editors I've been following for a while, since I first started researching editing options for my own books, because, yes, as editors do have other people check our own
Yeah.
books. But we're excited just to be here with all of you guys. And if you're watching live on YouTube, please feel free to drop questions in the chat box and we will pull them up on the screen as we go through. If you're watching on Twitter, we can't pull your questions up on the screen, but you're welcome to hop over to YouTube to ask them, or I will make sure that the editing panel gets your questions after the live as well. But before we get started, why don't we tackle the easiest of the questions, which is basically what kinds of editing there are, because I think that's where a lot of my confusion was. I'm a developmental editor primarily. I do some proofreading on the side. Belle, I know you do more technical too, and then Morgan, I know you do like everything.
All of
So
it.
all of it. Morgan, why don't you go first and just sort of break down the different levels of editing?
So I mean, there's when you're starting at like the highest tier of lettering editing, um there's developmental editing, and then you've got like copy editing and line editing below that. And then proofreading is going to be like the most basic, and that is the last step that you want to take. But developmental editing, that really focuses more on the actual story, and story development, versus something like proofreading is just going to be spelling, syntax, capitalization, punctuation, that sort of thing. And then copy editing is kind of in the middle of those, leaning more toward like really in-depth proofreading. So it's going to focus a lot of like how things are worded, might have some recommendations on rewriting things. And line editing, personally, I think is pretty much the same as copy editing. I know that some people will argue, but at least the way that I edit, because line editing is how it sounds. You go line by line by line by line, and that's how I copy edit. And so I don't see much of a difference. However, all editors have different definitions of what each tier of editing is. So I always say, you want to make sure that you know what you are getting with your tier of editing that you're requesting, and get clear answers so you know what to expect from the editor's work.
Mm-hmm. And Belle, do you think all editors do all the levels of editing, or are they more like in my case, I could do line and copy editing. I just prefer to stay more in the developmental realm with the proofreading.
So I do everything. I offer developmental editing to clients on a one-on-one basis, not like officially, because it's a lot more work and you can only do so many of those. Whereas if I'm just checking for grammar, the rules are the same on every single manuscript. I have to find the same mistakes. Oh, this author ignores this rule for their style. Cool. This author, So I find more editors that they might, like you said, they kind of dabble in all, but then they have their specific set that they're known for. Because copy edits, I can do way more copy edits in a 90-day span than I can developmental edits, depending on how rough it is, right? I've gotten manuscripts where I'm sitting there scratching my head like, I don't know what this needs. This is amazing already, and it needs something.
Highlight, comment, unclear wording, please rewrite. Don't know what you're trying to say.
I feel so bad when I say that. I saw that meme that it's like, editor, what does this line mean? Me quietly deletes the line.
Yeah, this is why we have editors do our own stuff too. And I'm sorry I had this goofy smile. I'm still recovering from wisdom teeth surgery last week.
So
you can't even tell. When I had mine removed, my face was like this. I was
Same. I only had the one, and so one side of my face was huge.
Oh no.
It was not a good look.
So for the indie authors watching, when do you know your book is ready to send someone else to edit? Because we know we can get stuck drafting and drafting and drafting.
Yeah. You want to go first on this one, Belle?
Sure. So even if you're a pantser kind of writer, I think you're ready for edits, like at least your official first round, even if it's developmental, when you have finally gotten to the end of the story or close to it, in my opinion. I've had people come to me for developmental edits with as few as 20,000 words written, just because they want to know the direction. But I always tell my clients, push to the end. Even if you have to rush it to get there the first time and get through that rough draft, that's when you're going to go back and now we're going to tear it apart. So that's how I feel. Maybe because that's how I write. What about you, Morgan?
Some similar views, but a little different too. I find that I think it's best when people have incorporated as much feedback from their beta readers as possible, and that they've given their entire manuscript at least one read through and one self edit.
I thought that's what we meant. I'm sorry. I thought we meant like for our self edit. I'm sorry, because I'm on the same page as you. I'm sorry, it's so early.
No, that's worry. No worries. I think either one is good because really, Belle, you hit it on the head. You start self-editing. See, I write clearer than I speak sometimes. But you start your self-editing before you would send it to like Morgan or Belle or I for the professional editing. Oh, yeah. For sure.
I would be embarrassed to send Morgan my rough draft.
But even then, it's ready to send to your trusted beta readers or alpha readers, which is a newer term to me. Once you've looked at it yourself and maybe done a self-edit, which we'll speak a little more to in just a little bit. And then, like Morgan said, follow that self-edit up with that first developmental phase. I personally...
And the reason I tell people that is because so many indie authors have limited budgets, but unfortunately an editor is something you really, really have to do. Like, you have to get one. And it's unfortunately not super cheap, especially if you want to get a higher tier. So I recommend that because it helps avoid unnecessary costs. if a writer knows that they're going to, cut out a scene or kill off a character, they decide that they want to kill off a character, but their first version doesn't have the character killed off, and or they want to change the ending. Like, those are all things that if you send to your editor before you make those changes, you're just having to pay for them to work on something that's eventually going to get cut anyway or get changed and have to be reviewed again. So you're just wasting money if you're doing that. So the more time and effort you can put into self-editing it beforehand, chances are that's going to save you money in the long run.
Yes.
I almost feel like that's counterproductive for me to tell people, but I want people to make their dreams come true with their books.
Exactly. I want my clients to succeed, and the best way you can succeed is if you give me as polished as you can make it, because then I can make it as polished as I can make it. But if there are simple errors that you probably could have caught, like, oh, you said her hair was brown here, and one sentence later you say it's red, that's something that your beta reader would have caught, because, oh my gosh, beta readers catch everything.
So true.
It saves you time. It saves you that effort, and you could have gotten more out of our services, where I can sit here and, because all those little errors are gone, I get to focus on big picture stuff. Like, you know what, this paragraph, there's something missing. Let's try to figure out how we make this, how do we build tension more? How do we do this more? And I can focus on the things that, make your book great.
Caitlin says that she sends hers when she's to the part where she hates it.
That's a good marker too, because that means you've gone over it a million times.
It's like, I've read, I could recite it in my sleep. I need a break. Send it off to the babysitter, the editor. Cycle Tahara, do you need to be certified in order to hang out your shingle as a professional editor? And I love the distinction here between professional, because there are author editors who are editing from experience. There are professional editors. And I would never discount an editor because of a degree or not if they have a good track record and a good reputation. It really depends on their portfolio and the reviews from other writers. I personally took my editing courses as part of my degree in college. So over 10 years ago, I started this journey with fiction writing class and then technical editing courses, but not all professional editors do. Some get an English degree and then they go work for a publishing company or an editing company. So what do you guys think about if you need a certification or something in order to claim a professional editor on your title?
I don't think you need a certification, but you need some sort of background. And I don't mean education. You don't have to have a degree in it. But like you said, being an author, being an avid reader, being at least familiar with the field, because that's what I wanted to do. I went to college for mine as well. I wanted to work for a publisher, and then the panorama happened. So I had to do freelance style, and I started my own editing services. But I've seen some editors where they pay to be part of almost like a guild of editors. And I do think that affords you more opportunities for jobs, for sure. And it makes it, I think, a little bit more easier, but I don't think it's necessarily required. Or if it is, maybe I need to get my certification. I don't know.
So I was a Japanese major, but I loved English and writing, and was like, you know what, I need these upper level electives. So I just took, the writing course and then the editing course and then the honors editing course. It's like, let's just get it all out of the way. But what about you, Morgan? What's your opinion?
So I don't have a degree. I was studying earth and space sciences.
Oh, nice.
So I changed direction a little bit. But then once I decided that I wanted to be an editor, it's always been part of who I am. English has just come so naturally. I always scored in the top 1% in the country on all those fancy tests. And no matter what job I worked, people would always come to me. Even I didn't even have to say anything. People will always come to me and say, can you proofread this for me? I never said anything about being good at it, or just people just figured that out about me. But when I decided to become an editor, I did take some classes, and I did get a certificate. However, no one has ever asked me to this point to see it, but I've got it.
It's there.
Well, the education can only go so far. It's really your experience that truly
Oh, yes.
matters.
Oh, for
And
sure.
now I
The
will
first book I
say, if
edited was not the best. The latest one I'd say is my best work, and then the one 10 days from now will be my best work or whatever.
that's right.
You learn as you go.
And Cycle of Tahara, if you're asking because you sort of want to shift to editing or author editing, I would definitely say it has been a huge benefit to me to have a very comfortable working knowledge with the popular manuals of style in the countries that I work with, almost more than the degree. So I have a very good working knowledge of the Chicago Manual of Style, of the Oxford Style Guide in the UK, and the Cambridge style manual from Canada. And those are my three default. And once a year, I go through their sites and see what's been added, what's been changed, so that I can be on top of that style guide. Really, that would be maybe a good place to start. And then each of those places offer certificates. Like you can go enroll online too and take courses, which I believe Susan Stradiata did. Oh, there you
A
go.
manual.
There's a manual. And if you're an author who doesn't plan to edit, you don't have to worry about the manual because your editor will do it for you.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
Chicago style. That's my favorite one.
I'm
AP has some rules that make me mad.
I'm not a fan of AP. I think it's wrong.
I think
It's for histories only. It's not supposed to be.
it's the reason that I try to only edit fiction. I can do MLA, but I don't do it as often as Chicago. But yeah, just it takes me back to college years whenever I hear APA.
That was the worst part of college is when you go to your different classes and they're like, we want AP style, we want Chicago Peruvian, we want MLA. And I'm like, can you just all agree for one day?
Make it easy for you? No.
No, always 5 points off. You did your citation wrong. Like, well.
So when do you know you need somebody else? Can you just self-edit your own work? This is one of the questions I get the most, especially as an author editor, because people are like, oh, well, you're a professional editor. Why do you pay other editors? And so, yeah. Can you we mentioned that you can definitely do some self-editing on your work. We are not saying you can't self-edit your work, but when do you know you've reached that point of, oh, this is it, I've done all I can do?
So self-editing only gets you so far because, and that's what I always tell my clients, you become blind to the mistakes in your work. You know what you meant to say. So your brain's going to gloss over it.
I wrote out answers just in case I forgot any little bits. It says, can I just self-edit my book? No, authors become blind to errors in their own writing.
Yeah, we call this page blindness, where your brain autocorrects because you see it so much and you just imagine that the te is a the.
Yeah, you do though, and it's little things, and it's the same reason why you can't just rely on ABC check, because I can't tell you how many times it doesn't flag things that are wrong, or it flags things that aren't wrong. Something told me to correct something to a rock and roll band name the other day, and that's not the word that was meant. I don't remember which band it was, but I remember I took a Snapchat of it because it was so funny to me. Like, this is not the word that was meant.
Yeah, Grammarly isn't very good either.
No.
Does it catch some things? Of course it does. But it not only does it not catch everything, but it recommends changes that are incorrect sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good segue for one of the main options to an indie author, especially one operating on a very tight budget the very first time, like I was. There are some self-editing tools that can make your editing a lot easier. Grammarly, Pro Writing Aid, and Autocrit, who I want to say thank you to. I have done some work with Autocrit, but I was a lifetime member before I ever did editing work for their team. And they've offered us a half off lifetime membership. And it's in the link in the description box. And it's like $300. I have to click the link to see, but that's what I think it was. I saved $1,600 off of what I was quoted for my line edit for my first book. She was like, it's going to be a $1,600 line edit. And then I was able to self line edit using Autocrit. and got to basically skip the line edit and go straight to the copy edit. Because it
Perfect.
caught a lot of things like repetitive phrases. So a lot of these softwares have similar things. I picked AutoCrit personally. They're not paying for the video, by the way, and I'm not getting any kickbacks. I'm just sharing my experience, but
Sure.
not getting any. I'm not getting anything if you click the link. So go ahead and help yourself. But no, seriously, I liked that it compared my standards to other genres because that wasn't something I saw in the others. So I was able to set it to Anne Rice. He writes dark fantasy, and it say compared to what readers expect in her writing, you have this percentage more pronouns, this percentage more adverbs, this percentage more
Wow.
telling versus showing. And I was
I
able
might
to
have to look
get
into
that.
this. That sounds interesting.
So it was really helpful. I caught 3,000 errors with it because it gave me an error counter. It counted 3,000 errors.
That reminds me of a question I have next.
Yeah.
What's the most errors you've ever found in a single manuscript? Like number.
I
Are
don't
we
have the
allowed,
number,
like,
but I will say that I did one last year where there were so many errors that Microsoft Word, with track changes, gave me an error message and said it didn't have the bandwidth to track more errors.
yep.
Hmm.
I had a high fantasy about 400 pages, like the regular traditional size, the 8.5 by 11. 5,800 errors before I got the we can no longer show errors in this document, and all my comments disappeared. Like, I was able to download it and they were there. I couldn't load them anymore. And you have to politely word that email, right? Like, it's not bad, but we're going to need some elbow grease on this one, and it's going to be a long one.
Yeah, we're going to do this in chunks because that's all Microsoft Word will allow me to do.
I just had to do that with a client, not because it was bad or anything, but just because her book is so long. We had to break it up just because we got to trim the sucker down.
I think I run into that more with people who are braving the world of writing a book in English, but English is not their first language.
Yes.
Which I just can't believe. It blows my mind, the bravery of someone to write a book in your second language.
I say a lot of my clients are from overseas, and not just like the UK or Canada, but like actual non-English dominant countries. And it baffles me. I speak 3 languages, and I could not imagine writing a book in Spanish. I could not. And it just makes me feel like I need to practice harder on my language because they do a good job a lot of the time.
How about you, Morgan? What's the most you ever caught?
I did one that, like, if you're including the comments, like changes / comments, it was over 11,000.
Oh gosh,
That's a lot. And I want to say too, for the authors watching, don't be embarrassed. We share these numbers for you to know
literally our job.
that you're not alone.
Too. It was one of the best books I've read in a long time. And I'm super confident that when that person goes to query that somebody's going to pick it up.
But you're not alone is the point here. You're not alone. And your editor, I tell people when they send it for developmental editing, you should get your developmental editing before you get your content editing, or before you get your technical editing for typos and grammatical errors. Because like Morgan said, why are you paying money to correct typos and grammatical errors, and then you're going to cut out the whole scene or the whole chapter? You're going to rewrite something else. So I'm used to seeing the uncorrected versions, the rough versions, and I don't care. It's fine.
Yeah, same. I never
like
want people to be embarrassed or feel bad or just because there's a lot of error, like a lot of changes in comments or errors, that does not mean your book is not phenomenal.
A lot of the time too, the errors aren't always going to be like, we need to completely change this plot point. It can be something small, like, what would be really good right here if we had a call to action right here. Let's move our call to action up. Like, sometimes it's not even that you didn't put the right content. We're just helping you get it at a better pace.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if your manuscript came to me with no errors, then I would not have a job. So
Yeah.
Exactly.
like there would be no point for me.
What do you think of Pro Writing Aid? My husband uses Pro Writing Aid. He likes it. I like the more genre specific stuff from Autocrit for myself. We both use Grammarly on top of, he uses it on top of Pro Writing Aid. I use it on top of Autocrit. And I'll let Morgan and Belle talk more. But really, what I really want to stress here is that those self editing tools are tools. They don't replace a human pair of eyes to follow up on your self editing, even the best of the tools.
Mm-hmm.
I like Pro Writing Aid.
Perfectly.
Yeah, you really did. I like Pro Writing Aid. It's a great tool. It gives really good suggestions. I really like it because it's very good at catching echoes.
Mm-hmm.
I have a really good eye for repetition. I feel like every editor has like that one thing they feel they're really good at. I'm really good at like how many times you use the word, and my clients hate me for it. They're like, oh, like how? Because I'll leave in the comments.
Word last sentence.
I do. I'll highlight the same word and I color code it so it's that color every single time that word comes up, and then I'll leave a comment. You used look 694 times. Let's cut that down. And they're like, man. But I like Pro Writing Aid because it catches echoes really well when you do your self edits, which reduces you catching it or you having to deal with it more later. And I like Grammarly as like Grammarly is not great. I would prefer, if you had to use one or the other for self editing, I say Pro Writing Aid or this, what do you call it, Autocrit?
Yeah.
Because that sounds really cool. Being able to compare against style, that sounds really interesting and useful.
Morgan, do you have any experience with self-editing software as an editor? Do you use it to help you with your edits?
I don't use it. Yeah, I don't use it. I am the editor.
When I'm doing an edit, I use my eyes.
Yeah.
When I edit my own book,
secret
I use
to editing, and I'm like,
exactly.
You're like, what do you do? I'm like, I read.
Exactly. When I'm working a client, it's me.
Reading.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I take a sentence, and then there's like probably like up to 40 to 50 questions that I ask myself. And I go through every single one of those things. And then it's on to the next sentence. And then do it all again.
Yeah. So how long does it take to completely edit a book? And I'm going to ask this from a developmental edit, then a line edit, then a copy edit, then a proofread. How long should an author give themselves in their writing, revising budget to polish their book?
That is a really hard question to answer because there's so many X factors. Like the length of the book, the editor's schedule, what type of editing you're getting. Even the genre makes a difference. Like a high fantasy book is going to take way longer to edit than just like a contemporary romance, because there's a whole world building aspect that the editor has to be learning themselves and then keeping track of and all of that. So I would say like 6 to 10 weeks, but it could be way less than that. Could be a little bit more than that. Or I'm working on one right now, and it's spanning a year and a half because we worked out a payment plan where he's paying what he could afford month to month, and so because of that, it's not that the book is taking that long. It's that that's what it's scheduled out to be for the payment plan. So it just really varies. Sorry, I dominated that. Anyone else want to say something?
No, but you're spot on. It does. Like I've had people bring me novellas. I can get that done in 2 weeks if it's a proofread. Now, if you want a developmental edit, that's going to take 2-3 weeks just for me to make sure. And that's if it's a shorter book, if it's your 70 to 90,000 range. But like you said, if it's high fantasy and you're bringing to me 150,000 word book, this is when I start. We're going to extend this package an extra 4 days just to make sure. We're going to extend this an extra this, or we're going to do this. Or I also do a revision process where I work I go through it the first time. I catch as many errors as I possibly can. I give as many suggestions, and then I give it back to the author to go through it, and then you come back to me again. And so that changes the
I
timeline
do
too.
that too.
Exactly, because some books need more work. Some clients, I'm going back and forth 3 and 4 times, and then some
Mhm.
clients, they come back to that revision, and it's really basically a proofread. Oh, this should have been a comma. Oh, this should have been this, and it's just they're gone. So
Mhm.
I agree. It varies dramatically from genre to word count to how rough it is, how polished it is, what exact edit you're getting. A developmental edit is going to take way longer than a proofread. A
Yeah.
proofread is your final step. We're catching those tiny errors that slip through the other steps. Like that's just reading the book and highlighting whatever. Oh, this isn't right.
Yeah.
Oh, let's change this. So she
Yeah.
said it
The
right.
best way to go about it is to get a sample edit from
Yes.
Yes.
an editor, because then they can see what your writing is like, what they're working with, and
Yes.
then they can figure out, not only can they figure out a timeline, but they can also figure out an accurate quote for you.
Mhm.
Yep. And
Yeah, I agree.
we do it accurately. I've had many clients where they want to get my premium or my biggest package, and I'll be honest, like you don't need this.
Mhm.
The section you've given me is actually quite clean. This is the package you need. And I'm like, as much as I love money, I'm not gonna, do highway robbery. I'd rather be honest and have a client come back because they know that I'm gonna be honest with them about what they need.
Yeah, it's a better use of our time too, to not commit time to edits that aren't needed,
Yeah.
per se, like you said. Um, and really, it depends on how many times you have to have a certain edit done. Um, so I tell people 2 to 3 weeks on average for a turnaround of most edits if the editor is free and you're not on a wait list. And then
Yeah.
give yourself 1 to 2 weeks to revise between each level. So if you're getting all four, then that's like 8 weeks of actual time with the editor, plus another 3 to 4 weeks. Like Morgan said, it can be 12 weeks. It could be longer if it takes you longer to revise your developmental edit and get it on
That's
to the
true.
next level. You have to ask yourself how long this is going to take you. And the first time, I would give yourself plenty of time. My mentor told me to do this, and I did not do this, and I regret it. And I've said this on many videos. Give yourself way more time than you need. And on your very first book, that might mean not setting a pre order date until you're in the editing and you know how long it's going to take you to
Yeah.
implement those changes. Um, but don't scrimp on the editing because that's what gets you bad reviews. And you only have one first impression for a debut novel. It's a huge pain to revise and re release later on. I say from personal experience, as those who've been following me know. Um, but yeah, and if you, like I mentioned earlier, and Belle and Morgan, if you're an author that had a bunch of errors, which is fine, that's why we're here, you might need another run through of the book once you have corrected all of them, depending on how many corrections you made. So if you get a copy edit back and you have 11,000 changes to make, chances are you might need another copy edit, or at least a copy edit of maybe the first 1 or 2 chapters to see how many errors are still left. And if you've got, if I tell people if I find more than 15 errors on a page as a
Oh yeah.
proofreader, I'm like, this needs to go back to copy edit. This
I've
is
done
not
that.
a proofread at
I've
10 to
sent stuff
15
back to the
errors.
client. I've sent stuff back to the client, like, not to be rude, but you ordered a proofread. This needs a copy edit. This needs a full edit so we can
Mhm.
either redo the package or because it's like any other job, right? The harder the job, the more money you're supposed to get. So if like you just said, if you come into me and there's still 50 errors per page, like not the right package for a proofread. And that is something that a lot of indies try to do. They try
Mhm.
to ask for a proofread because they think that's all they need. You need an edit too. I promise. Like I'm an
Yeah.
editor and I have someone else edit, and I hate it. I hate paying someone else who does my job to do my job on my work, but I do because I know I need it.
Yeah, I do the same thing. It's what I spend the most money on. Every single book that goes out is professional editing. I've got a copy editor, Terry. I've got a proofreader, Sam. They get all the books, and then a developmental editor who does developmental beta reads. So there are things you can do, though,
nice.
if you're an author. If you have other skills and you don't have the budget, you can trade with other author editors. Like, hey, I'll do your interior formatting if you'll do my proofread. Or, you know, I had someone who was kind enough to do my audiobook cover, and in exchange, I did their one of their reads for them. And that's really a good thing. But going to someone like Morgan and an actual company who can do it all and has established reputation could guarantee you get your book back when you want them, versus going with a one-off through Fiverr or something. You know, if you're going to go off with a one-off contractor, even me, get the sample edit, make sure their voice is a good match for you first. I don't know, Morgan, if that's something you offer, but when I was looking for edits for my own books, I paid 5 different authors a $10 sample edit fee, or editors, a $10 sample edit fee to get them to edit the first 20 pages of my book and send it back, and saw which errors they caught and which one matched my voice and my tone the best. And that's the one I ended up going with.
Yeah, I do free sample edits of the first 2,000 words.
Same.
And there have been times where people are like, no, I don't need to do the sample edit. Like, this is just, I'm like, no, I'm going to
Yeah,
do it.
me too.
I'm going to do it so that you can see if we're a good match, because I don't want to take their money and then have them decide that for some reason we're not a good match, which has never happened, but I don't want it to happen. But yeah, and sample edits I think are very, very important. You're allowed to get more. You're allowed to get sample edits from more than just one editor.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of like shopping for a car. You can test drive a few cars. You don't have to buy the only one you test drive.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think especially for like the independent contractors, and this is what I've heard through talking with other authors who have then later come to me, but like trying to find someone on a Fiverr or something like that. And those editors saying that they refuse to do a sample edit, or they'll do a sample edit, but they want you to pay $100 for 1,000 words. That's a red flag. I think that's a sign of someone who does not care about being an editor, and that's probably not what they do full time also.
Yeah, it really depends. Like I got my start on Fiverr before I ever went to work with Autocrit, and I got so many requests for sample edits, like hundreds, that I started charging the $5 that's the minimum they allow to just vet out, because a lot of them were just bots who are literally
That was
spamming
a problem.
inbox. And I was like, I can't deal with this. But if somebody comes to me outside of Fiverr, like if you're on Instagram and you follow me, or you follow my website and you email me, then yes, I'll do your sample edit. But yeah, they should not be charging $100 for an edit at all.
I
And
primarily use Fiverr. Like I'm trying to get off of it. I basically used it to start my stuff and get it going, because I lost my job in the pandemic. I hadn't graduated yet, and I was like, I need something. I need to get a portfolio going. I'll just do really, really cheap beta reads and stuff like that. And then now it's 3 years later, and I have off Fiverr clients, and I'm trying to branch fully into that now. And I do free sample edits up to 2,000 words. I've done up to 5,000 words if it was like exceptionally clean. I'm like, you know what? Can you just go ahead and send me your first 5 chapters instead? Because the page you sent me there's no errors on it, and there's no way this book has no errors. So I need more.
Yeah.
And I've had a few of those sample edits where I didn't like the way you edited. Okay. And then they come back and they say they went to someone else and they didn't like the way they edited. And I'm like, well, what are you not liking about the edits? Talk to us. Let's figure it out. Is there something about the style that you want? You have to communicate with your editor oftentimes. Like with poetry books, I have had a lot of clients, when you do poetry, there are completely different rules there's no rules really to poetry. You could write everything incorrectly and it counts in poetry. Whereas, and there's different forms. There's free form. There's like Ellen Hopkins does, where she makes designs with her forms and with her prose. So you have to find the editor that fits you. Like I may have
Mhm.
worked everything from middle grade fiction to like werewolf erotica, but my main wheelhouse is science fiction, fantasy, paranormal. So I
Mhm.
feel I do those books more justice than contemporary romance. I can do
Mm.
contemporary romance. I know how. But you get
Yeah.
me in a fantasy book, I've got all kinds of stuff. I'm over here like, oh, this is a really good nod to Tolkien here. You could totally take it further. Let's do this. Oh, this is, because I live and breathe fantasy. I mean, look at the bookshelf, right? It's all vampires and fae and
Yeah. But to
fiends
Morgan's
polluting the
point,
world.
though, if someone's wanting to charge you for a sample edit on Fiverr,
Oh,
ask
no.
them why. And they should have a good reason. And it should be a red flag. You
Yeah,
shouldn't just say,
$100.
okay, I'm going to order your edit, message me and say, hey, why are you charging for, a sample edit? And it's because
And
I
I'm not
literally,
talking about like the 5 or maybe even
oh, yeah,
$10 that you were
No,
just
the
talking.
ridiculous fees.
yeah.
Yeah. Or
But
like you're
ask.
taking full rates for the sample. No.
Yeah, ask because a legitimate editor, we have no problem explaining our fees to you, like because it's
Yeah.
legitimate. This is why I charge this because this is the amount of work I have to do. Oh, okay, but you're right. $100 for a sample edit. That like I
Yes.
made a face when you said that. I'm like, really? That
So
That's
doesn't seem
what
with,
right.
someone told me.
No,
I
I
was like,
believe
okay,
you. I'm
well, I'm
just
glad you came to me. I'm going to do yours for free.
let's
yeah.
see.
Hey, that's my
Hey.
editor.
We have a question from Caitlin that I've waited because it feeds into this next question on our list so well. But how much work should an author expect to do when they get those first revisions back of their book? Is it going to come back completely edited and ready to print, or is there stuff they have to follow up with?
I think that depends on the edit you get, though, right? Because if you just get a simple copy edit, you might get it back where so long as there's no major comments, yeah, you just need the proofread, you should be ready to go. And then, but if you're getting a developmental edit, like Morgan said earlier, that can be 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds depending on what your specific edits were and how much work you need to do or want to do for your work, how long it takes you. I always tell my clients to take your time. Creativity takes time. Don't try to rush it. But so it could I think Morgan said it earlier, where it can be anywhere from a few weeks to much, much longer, depending on what you need.
Yeah. Um, my answer for that is author needs to you'll need to comb through each one of the edits. I don't know what you guys do, but I expect people, I use track changes and I
Yeah.
Yep.
expect people to go through and accept or decline everything.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, depending on the level of editing being done, you might need to do some rewriting, and yeah, you might have multiple rounds of editing.
And so
But your
Caitlin's
work is not done once you hand it off to the editor.
No,
right.
yeah.
And that fed into Caitlin's question of, do you ever have argument? Because clients, I can't talk today, guys. I'm sorry. Argue with your changes. I have had more from a developmental side, and I own this as an author for a second. I was so crushed when I got my first book developmentally edited that I quit writing for a whole year because it came
No.
back bleeding red. The ending was trash. And she was right. She didn't say it. She was very kind when she said it, but it was essentially your ending
This
was
is
trash.
garbage.
We say it in
Um,
the editor way.
she's like, it makes no sense. And I'm left wondering why I even bothered reading the book. Basically, if you don't explain to me why, how does this resolve these issues? And I didn't argue with her, but I was like, nope, I'm not an author. I'll just be an editor forever. And my
No.
husband convinced me to get back into it and separate my personal self from my writing so that I could make it better. And I made the changes, and it was so much better. So, from a developmental side, I get more of those first time authors who this is their baby, it's an extension of them. I feel this on a personal level, but it makes you more defensive sometimes, and you can message back. It's okay to not agree with your editor's recommendations. You do not have to implement any of our suggestions. I try to be very clear on why I am suggesting what I suggest, or if you pick a style, I have on my submission form, you want Chicago Manual style, they're now on the 17th edition. And that means that names that end in S get an extra apostrophe S, which didn't used to be there, and some other things along those lines. And no more Oxford commas. I love Oxford commas.
Oxford
And
commas should be law.
They should be law. Why is this even a debate?
so, but if you're going by the manual of style, you know, it's like, I know that these are the rules, but I make people check mark. Still put the Oxford commas. Don't put the extra apostrophe S on the end of S ending names.
S
With things
apostrophe S
like
is
that.
chaos.
But yeah, if you don't want those, if you tell us up front, it will save you so much time not rejecting changes that were made.
I send out a grammatical preference survey to everyone I work with before I start actually editing the book. So, you know, do you prefer Oxford commas? Do you prefer the S apostrophe S? Those are both questions on there. You know, and what's your ellipses preference? You know, do you like doing the no space dot 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 no space, or the space dot space dot space dot?
I like space dot. It looks so nice.
Don't.
Oh no.
See, what I really hate
space
on the
dot,
side rail are the space
why?
after the periods, because those have to be taken out now that formatting is done digitally and it adds the extra space. And the ones where I get where they've done that, I'm getting the proofread, right? So it's like done, but because of the formatting software, now some of them have 4 spaces because they accidentally spaced twice manually, and then I will charge you extra if you send me a book to proofread that has extra spaces after every single period, because there are thousands of sentences in your book. And you can't do a find all, because you find all and then it might take one out that was actually needed because you only double spaced on some of them. It's like a lot, but that's a personal.
Find and replace all scares me.
Replace all is a
I go
scary
through
tool.
one by one. I was like, do I want that one? Yes, I do. No, not that one. Yes,
I
yes.
think
Right?
this is a choice. Really, most of the arguments that I see, I guess, is what I was getting at, is when it's your personal preference over sort of maybe the industry standard.
I have gotten arguments from clients where I swear anything that I recommend is based off my schooling, is based off years of reading, is based off talking to other readers, is based off watching videos of people talking about it. Like I'm giving you my expertise as someone who, no, I don't have 50 years in my field, but I do have a lot of experience with this. I've been reading since I, could read. When I've been reading since I was little. And I have had
Preparing my whole life for this moment.
right. And I had one client who he hated all of my suggestions. He hated it. He just would not. He took it as me telling him that his book wasn't good. And I kept saying that I didn't say your book's not good. Your book is good. We just need to clean it up in these areas. Oh, well, I don't really like doing a lot of descriptions. Well, we
That's
don't
your
know what
choice.
that's your choice. Though my recommendation is that I still don't know what your main character looks like. And like, he's a superhero. We should know, right? Like, and well, I don't like descriptions. Like, okay, well, you don't have to be mad. We just want to help you, man. But I have had clients argue because they just didn't like it, and maybe it is because it's their baby. I'm very self-deprecating. I'm like, my books are garbage. So when my editor gets it back, I'm like, that's about right. Like that makes sense here. You get all those comments like, what does this mean? You're like, I don't know. I don't know what I meant to write.
How about you, Morgan?
I mean, so it's the author's book. You know, I feel like I only have the best intentions. Like, I'm a good-natured person and a good-natured editor. And so all of the comments I make, they're all just suggestions. You could say no to all of them if you want to. I suggest them for reasons, and I will explain. If it's not obvious, I do usually explain why I'm making this change. But you can reject them all. They're just suggestions, and they are they're all just to help guide you to make the best book that you can. If as an author, if you're ever unsure about a certain change that someone made, you can always ask them, why did you make this change? And then, even when they explain why they've made that change, if you still want to reject it, you can. Like it's your book. You have every right to do that.
Absolutely. And if your editor doesn't want to answer questions, that's a red flag because I'm happy to tell you. Like, and that's the whole point. I want you to be the best writer you can be, and so here's the tools. This is why I did this. So maybe in your self edit, you remember it next time, and you catch it on your own, and then you get more out of my services. So ask. I'm always happy to answer questions.
Yeah, same.
And me,
Plus,
me
never
too.
be afraid to ask your editor questions.
I never argue with a client, though, to be fair. I feel like people come with arguments to me about their developmental, but it's like, I can make notes. If there's a certain type of feedback you're not wanting, I won't implement it on, future books you send me. This is a collaboration. And really, I only want to offer authors what they find helpful. And getting that sample edit too, though, will cut down on a lot of that because you'll know what type of responses you should be expecting from the editor before then. So how much does it cost to get a book edited? And before I ask Morgan to take the lead on this one, I will preface this by saying, as a general rule, it's always going to vary by the amount of words and the type of edit you're getting. But Morgan, how much do you think it should cost to get a book edited?
So yes, that is a huge range depending on how many words and the genre, the original state of the manuscript, because something that's 100 words here, but it has 20 mistakes versus something that's 100 words here that has one mistake. Obviously, the thing that's 20 is going to take me a lot longer, even though at first glance these look exactly the same. So that's why that sample edit is so important, to get a quote and know what's going to be happening ahead of time. But I would say be prepared to pay in the high hundreds, possibly likely into the thousands. But again, that depends on what service of editing you're getting.
And Belle, when you say a writer needs a developmental editor, would you say they need a developmental editor versus going to a line or copy edit? Because this ties into that as well. Developmental editing is expensive because, as we've all stressed, it is the most time-consuming edit besides a line edit, in my experience.
I don't know an actual timeline on when you would get a developmental edit. Like I said, I've had clients come to me with only 20, 30,000 words, but they just have no idea where to go with the story. So they're like, I want a developmental. I want you to look at this and tell me, what's missing. I can say like, oh, we need to, if you do this, you can do this kind of run through. If you do this, you can do this trope. If you do this, I can point all these things out. But I think it depends on where you are with the story. Maybe Morgan has a better answer for this one, because I think it's different for everybody. Like, I have a very committed critique group, and 3 of them are authors, so it's constant developmental edits and responses from them. So when I'm actually done with my rough draft, it's actually been looked over by 4 or 5 different authors and 2 editors already that are just friends. So I think Morgan might have a better answer on that one.
Morgan, when do you know someone needs a developmental edit versus going into the technical edits?
So what I do, this might be like a backwards way to answer, but what I do is, if someone comes to me and they're like, hey, I'm interested in your services, I want to do a sample edit, but I don't know what level of editing I need, I'm like, no problem. I provide them in the sample edit, I give them notes with developmental editing, copy editing, and proofreading. And I make a note for what category each edit falls under. So they can see, yes, I like that note. Oh, that falls into developmental editing. Oh, that one does too. Oh, that one does too. Okay, you know what? Maybe I need the developmental editing. Or they can be like, no, that's not what I need. Or, oh, that's going to be above my budget, but it looks like these great notes about copy editing, those are going to be within my budget. So I always recommend get the highest level of editing that you can afford. And that's what the experts across the field recommend. You're just going to get that much better of a product.
Yeah. If you have the budget, I definitely agree with Morgan because editing is super helpful across the board where you can start. When I went with The Violet Twisted Fate, I didn't have the money to get, a really expensive developmental edit, but I did invest in a professional beta read because I didn't have a critique or support group like Belle did at that time. I was brand new to all the socials and stuff as a writer, and I found a developmental editor who did less detailed feedback on a beta read, but it was more detailed than a beta reader who's just somebody who reads your book. Like instead of saying, "Oh, I love this," she was like, "This works really well here because it shows us this, this, and this. It showed me exactly what I was doing right. It showed me exactly what I could have done better." That was the edit from the developmental editor that crushed my soul and made me think I was never going to write again. Like this ending just left me wanting because it doesn't resolve any of the plot points that you've established in your book. Like very actionable, specific feedback. So if you're an author and you don't have the money for a full developmental edit, because that's my job, I know it's expensive. Definitely try to find a professional beta read if you don't have that circle of professionals that you can lean on for your feedback. But it needs to be an objective, typically outside source, not your best friend or like somebody like that, unless they can be brutally honest. Like my sister is one of my beta readers and she is painfully honest. She told me in my last book that it was like there was a scene that read like a fever dream, which has now been rewritten. Like if you don't have brutally honest, that's sort of my take from the developmental side is try to afford one if you can. You almost always need developmental feedback of some kind, even if it's not a full edit. But the professional beta reads are worth doing. Just make sure that they're actually developmental editors before you pay them to do your beta read. When there's so many people that would do it for free in fellow author groups and stuff for beta reads, not talking about developmental edits. Like make sure before you pay somebody that you're getting something worth paying for. The last question that we're going to have before we wrap this up, well, actually, I guess there's two parts, but one we've already talked on. If you want to leave your editor for a different editor because you've gone through the edit and you've decided this doesn't work for you, or you can no longer financially afford to work with that editor anymore, is there a way you can do that without leaving a bad impression?
I don't know if it's just I'm an INTJ. I'm not offended by anything. Everything is business. I found out one of my clients got a new editor because there's another book in the series that I didn't edit. I was like, oh, she got a new editor, but she still follows me and she came to me for a proofread later, and that's fine. Like Morgan and I said earlier, your editor needs to match your voice, and I'm not offended if I don't, because if you don't feel that I can give you the best work, I want you to have the best work. So it doesn't have to be some weird thing. I've had clients go to someone else and then come back and say, oh, I thought I wanted something else, but can I hire you again? Absolutely. Shop around, like test drive the cars. It's your baby. You need to be as satisfied with it as possible. And me personally, I'm not offended by it. I do, if I had hordes of clients leaving me, I would be like, okay, what am I doing wrong? But a few clients here and there every quarter that just go get a new editor, and I realize to see that editor is more prominent in their genre. Well, that makes sense. Like I'm mainly fantasy. You write erotica. Probably makes sense for you to get an editor that specializes in that. Like I'm not offended by it, but that's me.
Morgan, what do you think if somebody needs to go a different direction in editing?
So if you're an author, before you switch editors, talk to your current editor about what you're unhappy with. I think kind of an overarching theme this whole broadcast has been, we want what's best for you.
Absolutely.
Just tell us if there's something that you're unhappy with. It might be something like certain things we're not criticizing, but commenting on too much because the last 5 clients we've had have all preferred that.
Mm-hmm.
But now you're a little bit different, and we're just kind of still stuck in that mode of going hard and heavy on those types of things. And so
it's the same thing as asking questions. Ask.
Yeah, it might just be a matter of, like, hey, I don't like how you're doing that, or leave those things alone, or oh, okay, no problem. And then from there on, no, it's not an issue. So talk to them about what you're unhappy about, because it might be a really simple fix. But creative differences can happen. If you still want to switch editors, make sure that you're not violating any active contracts by doing so. And be aware that there may be consequences for leaving mid-project. You might have to pay for the work done to date, or you might have to pay out the rest of the project, just depending on what your contract says. If you're having, money issues, talk to your editor, ask questions, and see if like a new payment plan from here on out is an option, rather than just dropping off the face of the earth. As an editor, love communication. I'd rather get 20 bad news emails than no emails and just wondering, where'd that person go?
That's where I agree. That's why I was like, if I had hordes of clients leaving, I'd be panicking. Like, what's going on?
Right. Was it me? It was me. Oh my God.
And life happens, and we editors are people too. And we get that jobs can change and come and go, and medical bills come up, and stuff just happens. And Morgan said earlier, you have somebody doing a payment plan. A lot of us are willing to work with authors because this is our passion.
I've yet to find a freelance editor that isn't here to do some kind of payment plan to work with you in some capacity on some level. Like, we're creatives. We're pretty flexible. We're willing to help you get where you need to go. That's why we do it.
Then the last question.
I want us to be a team and like get this book awesome, get it perfect. And what do we have to do to get there? Oh, we have to do a payment plan? That's totally fine.
Absolutely.
See, that's how I am as an editor too. In all my client emails, I always say we. I'm like, we are going to get this. Don't worry. We're going to get this. It's us. We're in this together now.
Absolutely. So the last question.
Published, all of a sudden it's, oh, that author, they did such an amazing job. It's like, I had nothing to do with this.
Right? Absolutely. Just proud of them and what they've accomplished. Really, we're just polishing their work is all it is.
That's what I always say. It's like, I'm just doing the rules. You wrote the story. All I'm here to do is just to like polish it up a little bit.
Yeah. There is a very common question from indies, and I've saved it for the very end, which has to do with the misconception that you send your book in its raw, unedited form to an editor, and they send it back and you just upload it into KDP, which it has to be formatted before you do that, just for everybody to know. But the question is, why can't I, as an indie author, just send my book to one editor and have it all done at once?
Well, for one, the whole reason you're sending it to an editor in the first place is 2 pairs of eyes are better than 1, right? It's the same thing in editing. 2 editors, or an editor and a proofreader that are separate, are going to get you the best result. But also, I stopped about 6 months ago. I don't accept manuscripts that have not been at least self-edited anymore. And you can tell. You can tell when a manuscript has or has not been self-edited. Like, I promise you. And it's not in the ways you think it is. It's not just, oh, well, there's no commas here. You can tell when something's been self-edited and when it hasn't. You can tell by how they talk about it. You can tell by how it's written. I no longer accept manuscripts, because if it hasn't been self-edited, it's something that we touched on before. If I edit this rough cut gem and then you make 50,000 changes, you're just going to have to get it edited again, because now you need all this new information edited. Like, you have to have at least I don't want to say polished because that's what we're doing, but a self-edited, beta read, whatever you want to call it, cleaned up rough draft before you want to pay that money, or else, like Morgan said earlier too, you're just wasting your money because you're going to have to get it looked at again. And what if it still has more problems? Now
If
you're
you're
just
gonna
going in
maybe
circles.
give it a bath before you send it to the editor to printify.
Yeah.
How about you, Morgan? What would you say as far as why can't I just send my book to one editor?
So,
And I don't just mean one person to do all the pieces, because with enough time away, I'm sure, it's fine. But I
Right.
mean, like, one editor, and then boom, here's your perfectly packaged, ready to go
Yeah.
book in a single run.
so for me, I do offer a one-stop shop service.
Mm.
So,
Oh,
you know,
really cool.
I will do developmental editing and copy editing and proofreading the same manuscript. I will do that all. So some editors can do it all. However, that is not very common.
Mm.
Um,
So you do
and
it all at
I
one
don't, I
time?
don't do at this time at least. I don't do formatting. So, which I know that a lot of editors also don't
Yeah.
format because that's a separate skill set. Be a professional as that, and it's different software, and so you'll probably at least need to have somebody else formatted it. Um, but like Belle was saying, there are pros to having different people do the different tiers of editing for you. It's more eyes, more opinions. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
But even yours, it sounds like you send it back and they revise it and then you do the next step, right? Instead of here's your developmentally edited, copy edited, proofread file all at the same time.
I do kind of do it like here it is all at the same time. So I very rarely do an entire manuscript at once. Like for
Mhm.
whatever reason, it almost always gets broken up into chunks. Um, but so I'll send that, but then they'll make their changes and send it back to me. And then I'll send it back to them. And it usually ends up taking 3, sometimes 4 rounds of editing,
Mhm.
which that's all part of the original price. Like that's not an extra charge because that's all part of the process
Yeah.
when you do it this way.
Mhm. That's
Um,
great to know. So yeah, if you're watching, really you have options. There's a self-editing option, which we strongly recommend following up with a human pair of eyes or 2 human pair of eyes. There's author editors and freelancers that you can find. If you're interested on Fiverr and that's all you can afford, that's okay. I have a video on how to find reputable editors on Fiverr in the Indie Author Behind the Scenes playlist, because there's a lot that but request those sample edits. And then also going with an editing company, if not Morgan's, then other editing companies sometimes have more than one team member and they can do all of those in house in a package. So there's the benefit of, hey, instead of finding a developmental editor and then a copy editor and then a proofreader, and I have to get sample edits from 3 people potentially, going to this one company, getting one sample edit, having them take care of all of it and just do the back and forth. Like Morgan said, here's your file from the developmental, edit, like accept or decline, implement your changes and send it back. Um, to There's a lot of options for indie authors to edit their own books. I really appreciate you, Belle and Morgan, coming on and sharing your expertise with us. I highly recommend Belle and Morgan. That's the reason they're on this panel. If you'd like to check out their editing services, the links to their editing services are in the description box on YouTube. And you can follow them both on social media as well. And Belle is also an author. You can see a little bit of her books on Instagram. And then if you want that AutoCrit code, they have a free membership that you can get, and it's free forever. Like you don't ever have to pay. You just don't get all the reports you get with the paid one. You can try it out for free, and if you want that other one, you can get it at their link during the sale. I don't have the links to Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid on there yet, but those are the links we do have. Um, But good luck on your writing. If you have questions or comments and you're watching the replay, please leave them in the comments. I'll make sure they get to Morgan and Belle, and then we'll reply to you here on the channel. Thank you both so much. Have a great
This
weekend.
was so fun.
This was
That
fun.
flew by.
Oh, thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everybody.